In a significant development, the first phase of a ceasefire deal in Gaza has taken hold, and after 2 years of devastating conflict that began with the October 7th attack, there is a glimmer of hope. Hamas has agreed to release its remaining Israeli hostages, and in a reciprocal move, Israeli forces have begun pulling back from designated areas within the Gaza Strip. President Donald Trump, who unveiled the plan last week alongside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has hailed this as a historic breakthrough. For the families of the 48 hostages, many of whom have endured an agonizing wait, this news brings a profound sense of relief and anticipation. This initial step, however, is just one piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle. The full 20-point plan proposed by the Trump administration outlines a far more comprehensive vision for the region's future. It demands concessions from Hamas that go to the very core of its identity and power. While the group has consented to the hostage exchange and a temporary ceasefire, it has remained conspicuously silent on the more difficult requirements. These include the complete disarmament of its military wing and a fundamental change in the governing structure of Gaza, issues that have been intractable for decades and represent the true test of this diplomatic effort. The world is watching this fragile truce with a mixture of hope and deep-seated skepticism. The scenes of Israeli troops repositioning and the publication of a list of Palestinian prisoners to be released are tangible signs of progress. The United States has even begun deploying a small contingent of 200 support troops to Israel to help coordinate the logistics and humanitarian aid, a clear signal of Washington's commitment to overseeing the process. Yet, the core conflict remains unresolved. This is not a comprehensive peace agreement, but rather a transactional pause, born more of necessity and exhaustion than a genuine meeting of the minds. The question on everyone's mind is why Hamas, after 2 years of defiant resistance, chose to accept this part of the deal now. The answer is not a single event, but a convergence of immense pressures. The group found itself cornered by a combination of severe military degradation, dwindling international support, and growing unrest among the very population it claims to represent. It was a decision made from a position of profound weakness, not strength. Understanding these pressures is crucial to grasping both why the deal happened and why its future remains so profoundly uncertain and precarious. The military reality on the ground for Hamas had become undeniably grim. Over 2 years of relentless conflict, the Israel Defense Forces, armed with advanced weaponry, backed by U.S. intelligence, systematically dismantled much of Hamas's operational capacity. Targeted killings removed numerous senior commanders, creating a leadership vacuum and disrupting command and control. These losses weren't just symbolic. They crippled coordination of sophisticated attacks and impaired management of fighters across the enclave, forcing Hamas into a defensive, fragmented posture. Physical infrastructure suffered catastrophic damage. The underground tunnel network, used to move fighters and to smuggle weapons, was largely destroyed or inoperable. Israeli forces located and demolished countless weapon caches, rocket manufacturing sites, and command posts, severely limiting rearming and sustainment. Constant aerial surveillance and repeated ground incursions left very few safe havens, forcing remaining fighters into retreat and survival, unable to mount the resistance seen early in the war. The sustained military degradation had a profound psychological effect. The image of Hamas as an unbreakable resistance force, cultivated for years, began to crumble under visible losses. Leaders being eliminated and strongholds overrun shattered the group's projection of strength. That erosion hit morale internally and diminished its standing among Palestinians and among supporters across the Arab world who viewed mounting losses as a failing strategy. Facing this stark military calculus, Hamas leadership confronted a choice. Continuing would likely mean annihilation as a cohesive military entity and as a political entity. The deal offered a lifeline, a chance to halt the Israeli advance and to regroup. Releasing hostages was a painful concession, but a pragmatic move to preserve what remained. Military pressure from Israel, with strong American backing, effectively forced Hamas to the negotiating table, leaving few viable options for survival. The immense suffering of the civilian population in Gaza was another critical factor that pushed Hamas toward the deal. 2 years of war had left the enclave almost entirely destroyed. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, the conflict has claimed more than 67,000 Palestinian lives, a staggering toll that has touched nearly every family. Beyond the casualties, daily life had become a struggle for basic survival. A severe lack of fuel paralyzed transportation and the remaining hospital generators. Access to clean water and sufficient food became a daily crisis, with humanitarian aid struggling to meet the overwhelming needs of a displaced and traumatized population. This protracted humanitarian crisis began to curdle public opinion within Gaza. While Palestinians have shown incredible resilience, the unending hardship and the perception of a hopeless future fueled a quiet but growing dissent. In a rare display of public frustration, small-scale protests erupted in some towns. People, exhausted by the devastation and loss, began to voice their anger, not just at Israel, but also at Hamas for its role in perpetuating a conflict that had brought them nothing but misery. This internal pressure, though not widespread enough to openly challenge Hamas's rule, represented a significant crack in its domestic support base. For Hamas, which derives its legitimacy from the support of the Palestinian people, this shift in public sentiment was a dangerous development. The group's leaders could no longer ignore the fact that their strategy was costing them the backing of the very population they governed. The narrative of heroic resistance rang hollow against the backdrop of starving children and destroyed homes. The risk of losing control over the population became a real and pressing concern. A group that cannot command the loyalty, or at least the acquiescence of its people, cannot hope to govern or fight effectively in the long run. Therefore, accepting the deal became a way for Hamas to address this growing internal crisis. The ceasefire offered a desperately needed respite for the people of Gaza, a chance for humanitarian aid to flow more freely, and a moment to begin the long process of recovery. By agreeing to the truce, Hamas could be seen as responding to the suffering of its people, potentially restoring some of its damaged credibility. It was a calculated move to relieve the immense public pressure and stave off a potential collapse of social order, buying the group time and a chance to reassert its relevance in a post-war landscape. Hamas also found itself increasingly isolated on the international stage. Countries that had once offered tacit or overt support began to distance themselves, applying their own forms of diplomatic pressure. Qatar, Turkey. These former interlocutors and financial backers changed their tune. Concerned about the escalating humanitarian catastrophe and the risk of a wider regional conflict, they actively urged Hamas to accept the terms of President Trump's plan. This shift left Hamas with fewer friends and even fewer resources to draw upon Egypt, sharing a border with Gaza. Deeply concerned about regional stability, played a crucial role in tightening the diplomatic vice. Cairo made it clear its patience was wearing thin. Egypt warned continued conflict could mean the group's destruction, and a security and refugee crisis on its border. This pressure added another layer of urgency, signaling traditional avenues of support and sanctuary were rapidly closing, leaving Hamas cornered geographically and politically. Simultaneously, the United States under President Trump orchestrated a maximum pressure campaign. Diplomatic efforts, financial efforts, intelligence efforts. Washington imposed new sanctions targeting Hamas's financial networks, making it increasingly difficult to access funds, making it increasingly difficult to procure new weapons. The U.S. reportedly provided Israel with real-time intelligence, which was instrumental in successful military operations. This coordinated effort sent an unambiguous message. There would be no let-up until Hamas made significant concessions. The confluence of diplomatic forces left Hamas with little room to maneuver pressure from regional powers. Direct warnings from Egypt and the relentless U.S.-Israeli campaign created an environment where compromise was the only logical path. Hamas leadership understood, defying consensus meant further isolation. Agreeing to the first phase was a strategic retreat, an acknowledgement the global political landscape had shifted against them. Holding out for a better offer was no longer realistic. While the release of hostages and the partial Israeli withdrawal mark a crucial de-escalation, the deal's future is fraught with peril, because the most contentious issues remain unresolved. The Trump plan's central demands, the complete disarmament of Hamas, the removal from power, the formal recognition of Israel, are conditions Hamas has consistently rejected as tantamount to surrender. These points strike at the heart of Hamas's ideology and its reason for existence. It is difficult to imagine the group voluntarily giving up its weapons or its political authority, which it sees as the primary source of its power and legitimacy. The fragility of this moment cannot be overstated. This is a peace born of pressure, not of trust. Experts like Dr. Layla Haddad have noted that Hamas accepted the deal because it had run out of options. Agreements forged under such duress are notoriously unstable. Hamas may attempt to delay, renegotiate, or only partially comply, hoping to preserve its political role. Israel and the United States, however, expect full compliance, setting the stage for future standoffs that could shatter the current calm. The plan leaves many core grievances unaddressed. Status of Jerusalem. Expansion of settlements in the West Bank Palestinian statehood are not central to this agreement. Without a clear political horizon for all Palestinians, any peace in Gaza is likely temporary. Lasting stability requires a comprehensive solution for people beyond Gaza's borders, a task as daunting as ever in this long, painful conflict. In conclusion, while the current ceasefire provides a desperately needed pause and relief, it is essential to remain cautious. The road ahead is laden with obstacles. For peace to take root, diplomats must move beyond the immediate crisis and build a framework for genuine political reconciliation. This will require sustained international engagement, a massive effort to rebuild Gaza and restore dignity to its people, and a willingness from all sides to build the trust that is so glaringly absent. Without it, this fragile truce may be remembered not as the beginning of peace, but merely as a brief intermission in a long and tragic war.